What's something that other people find interesting or fun that you just can't get into?
Honestly, the first thing that came to my mind, you're not going to like this, Emily. Football.
That's fair.
I just can't do it. I can't. I try, I get the competitive angle, but it's just like, I don't know. It's just the fact that these people are giving themselves brain damage. Just it's not something I can get over by the beer and the hot dogs.
That's fair and probably more reasonable. I shouldn't be able to push that thought to the side and enjoy the sport.
See, I always assumed that's why you liked the sport.
No.
Ooh.
But I do fully...
Danger.
Not fully, but I do push it to the back of my head while I'm watching.
But I mean, that's what they do. The players, they push it to the back of their head because they're like, well, I'll get money from this. And then
I'll die.
And then other things go to the back of their head, like pools of blood, I
People's
assume.
Feet.
Yeah.
Welcome to Butter No Parsnips. Every week on Butter No Parsnips, your hosts Emily Moyers and Kyle Imperatore take you on an adventure through the weird, wacky, wonderful, and sometimes even wicked world of one wayside word. Strange characters, delightful bits, and general joyousness abound. Join them as they test each other's etymological expertise.
Hey everybody, welcome to Butter No Parsnips. I'm Kyle Imperatore.
And I'm Emily Moyers. Kyle, don't worry. The word I have today is not quite so dangerous.
Oh, okay. So I can take off my safety helmet.
Yeah, you had the big helmet and the shoulder pads on. For people listening on Spotify, this is fully true, everything that I'm saying.
Absolutely. I always wear shoulder pads under anything that I wear because I dress like a 1980s businesswoman.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Yep.
Emily, what word have you got for me today?
Kyle, the word I've got for you today is Jejune.
Oh.
Jejune. You might know this word. This word's knowable.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I think I do know this word. I'm going to ask some questions first. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
It's got a good mouthfeel. Let's start with that.
Yeah. Although the judge is a little bit rough.
Well, if you don't think of it as judge, if you think it is June, it's like you're starting to say June, and then you're like, is it June? And they're like, yeah, it's June. June. Yeah. June. It feels French. The fact that you have to check is a problem. Wow. So not French.
No. Not French, but Kyle, when you said it, we've done so many episodes of this podcast, I forgot the outline that I have written. I'm like, was there French? I genuinely don't remember anymore. That's how mush my brain is.
Yeah, that's fair.
But no, it did not. This word did not come through French.
One of our friends brought up the word jejune related to another word that we were talking about. And I remember being like, oh, that's a fun word.
I will tell you that Arne Christensen brought up this word, and I fully forgot until I was 3/4 of the way through writing this episode.
That's fine. I know nothing about the word, but I think I know what it means. Does it mean having something to do with youth? Does it mean young?
So, you've hit on something correct. Etymologically, it is muddy. We're going to get to it. But for the sake of guessing the definition, the clue I was going to give you is youth. But jejune is an adjective. I'll tell you that much.
So it doesn't just mean young.
A stretched definition of young. Okay. Young in a particular context.
Does it mean like green, like new to something, jejune?
Still not exactly it.
I can't ask for any more hints, so I can I'll guess one more time, and I'll say...
All right, guess one more time. Think about a context in which someone might be green. Maybe to say that someone's work is green.
Oh, does jejune mean amateur or amateurish?
Yeah, I would say that is more on the nose. Yeah, so jejune, as it is used today, most often means of a person, childish or immature, or of a work, naive or simplistic. But it can also mean uninteresting, unsatisfying, or lacking substance.
Oh.
Stemming from a more literal definition, lacking nutritional substance, or meager or scant.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm
so
on
we're
board.
sort of like, there's layers of metaphor. There's a ways that it walked from its etymology.
Tell me more. Tell me how we got there.
So jejune came to English in the early 1600s during the Renaissance era, when scholars were pulling Latin and Greek words into English left, right, and center.
Yes, they were. I mean, I would say they just kind of gave up on English words at that point.
Yeah, they said English needs to sound like the classics.
Yeah.
And this word was indeed borrowed from the Latin jejunus, Jejunus. Although in more proper classical Latin, you'd hit the diphthongs a little harder and say it more like jejunus.
Jejunus. That's crazy to me that was ever a word in Latin. Like, really? Like, that's stunning.
Yeah. And in earlier forms, it would be spelled with I's instead of J's. So classically, it would be I-E-I-U-N-U-S. And sometimes you see that in English as well.
Jejune?
With I's. For more on that topic, I's and J's, see Kyle's deep dive in episode 85, Jactitation, on the origin of J. But yeah, if you look at early instances of this word from the 1700s, it's just fully hit or miss whether it's going to be spelled with I's and J's.
Sure.
Made looking for it in old dictionaries very difficult. A lot of old dictionaries just merged their I's and J's section. It was just one big blob between H and K.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy because, like, this can't be helpful for anybody, you know?
Because it was one letter. It would be less, in that point, it would be less helpful to separate them.
Yeah.
Because people wouldn't necessarily know where to look.
Right.
But it's crazy. Jejunus in Latin was used figuratively to mean dry, barren, empty, or meager. But literally, it meant hungry or fasting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Jejunus was the adjectival form, but it gave rise to other Latin words, such as the noun jejunium, which meant the act or practice of fasting. The verb jejento, which meant to break fast or to have breakfast.
Oh,
or
my gosh.
jejentaculum, which meant breakfast.
Jejentaculum. Wait, how do we anglicize that into a Latin word for breakfast?
We have.
Yes!
There is an English word.
Yes!
The English word has been used almost never, except maybe to be sort of like comically flowery. But gentacular can mean relating to breakfast.
Gentacular.
Yeah. So if you took like a post-gentacular stroll, after breakfast you took a walk.
I want to tell people that I had I've just finished my gentaculum.
Yeah, that word gets used as well.
Oh.
Almost never, but they exist.
Almost never. That's gonna at least quadruple now that I know what this word is.
Yeah. So gentaculum is breakfast, and gentacular can be relating to breakfast.
Love that.
Fantastic words.
That's really
Please
good.
Use them.
That's good.
Contemporary Dutch linguist Michiel de Vaan attempts to trace this word further back in his Etymological Dictionary of Latin. He connects jejunus to a Proto-Indo-European root, hjag, which appeared in words relating to worship and or sacrifice. He connects jejunus with a number of cognates in other languages, such as the Sanskrit yajati, meaning to honor, worship, or sacrifice, and the Greek agios, meaning holy, from which we do get some more niche English words like hagioscope and hagiography.
Yeah.
And I think the place Hagia Sophia also.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Based on this etymology, there are certainly some religious angles to the Latin jejunium, and there's a facet to those linguistic roots which express not only worship, but sacrifice.
So you're talking about like spiritual fasting, you mean?
The practice, yes.
Right, okay, sure.
Yeah, because he connects it to words for worship and for sacrifice as well. That said, it's kind of unclear what kind of sacrifice is implied in these older words.
Have you looked into how the Latin word was used? Like what context? Was it used in religious context?
It was used in Latin. I couldn't find, I did not actually look into like Latin quotes.
That's beyond our
I know in Latin it was used to mean fasting, I think often in a more casual sense, and then was extended metaphorically to mean like empty or barren. So I think they used it as a less maybe a less intense word, but trying to trace it back to like how it came from these roots to mean sacrifice to a word that means fasting or hungry.
Yeah.
So like ritual sacrifice of animals was certainly a big part of classical pagan worship. We've talked about that before in a Greek context. Kyle, I don't know if you remember anything specific about like rites of sacrifice.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there were a lot of different like cults of like polytheistic religions.
Yeah, I think cult in that sense is like a little bit different from how we use it. It's
more like
cult
sect.
Because they talk about like all of the gods had like a cult associated with them.
Yeah. And they ritual sacrifice of animals was a very important way of worshiping, of showing that you like, you know, cared about the god, because it was like giving them the meat, right?
Yeah. And equally integral in Roman rites, pre-Christian Roman rites as well. Devon draws a connection between Latin words for sacrifice and for fasting and chalks that up to, quote, the habit to perform the first sacrifice of the day on an empty stomach.
Dude, that's crazy. There's no idea. Does he have proof for drawing a connection between those two things? That's insane.
I did find mention of some sacrificial rituals being performed at sunrise. You know, particularly if you were sacrificing to the Olympian gods, to the heavenly gods, you would have to do that at the very least during the day. And I guess you could extrapolate that if you're doing it first thing in the morning, maybe you did this before breakfast.
And is that why like the breakfast was like used also that route, because it was like, all right, we're doing the fast part and now we're breaking the fast.
Yeah, breakfast just means breaking fast. That hit show that was big a few years ago, Breaking Fast.
Breaking Fast. It was a real interesting combination of Breaking Bad and
The Bear.
The Bear.
That chef show.
Because it's breakfast. They're cooking something one way or another.
But I couldn't find anything like any information about like fasting as a part of these rituals.
Sure.
I wondered if the association with sacrifice is more on a level of like personal sacrifice, like fasting as a form of sacrifice.
Sure.
That is purely my speculation.
Sure.
What I can tell you with a little more certainty is that ritual fasting was, in general, not a huge thing in ancient Rome, at least not until Christian fasting rituals came about.
Sure.
Anno Domini.
Right, yes.
You know, in the year of our Lord. The only fasting ritual I could find in pagan Rome was the Jejunium Cereris, a festival honoring the Roman goddess of agriculture, Ceres. Ceres.
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah. I don't know. She was the goddess of agriculture.
She is. So Ceres in classical Latin, it would have been pronounced more like Ceres, but today people say Ceres. It's like a Cicero Cicero situation. Yeah. Ceres was the Roman counterpart to the Greek goddess Demeter. Fasting rituals were much more common in ancient Greece, and there are multiple festivals honoring Demeter and her daughter Persephone, which did involve fasting. Jejunium Cereris was very likely inherited from those Greek traditions and pulled in. I couldn't find a ton about what the festival involved, except that there was fasting in honor of Ceres, and likely also her daughter Proserpina, of whom the story is exactly the same as Persephone.
Oh, so funny.
It's just
they just barely changed the name for that one, huh?
I know. I was like, you got to try harder than Proserpina.
Listen,
we're trying to hide it now.
Romans, man.
She's totally different. Her name is Persephone, and actually, she had a 4-headed dog, not a 3-headed one. So
listen, I put your pantheon into a checker, and it showed that you are stealing from a lot of other sources. You know,
you just have a lot of cited material here. Yeah. All of which is to say, for one reason or another, the Latin jejunius literally meant fasting, whatever its linguistic origins before that. In the 17th century, when it was borrowed into English as jejune or jejune, it meant the same, fasting or hungry or without food. In English usage, the fasting association kind of faded pretty quickly, but jejune also encompassed a wider definition of not nourishing or not substantial, and that's kind of what stuck a little bit more.
Sure.
Of a person, it can mean thin or malnourished. Of land, it might mean poor or barren. Of food or other resources, it might mean scant or meager. For instance, I have a quote here from a 17th century sermon by English theologian John Smith in one of the
John
sermons.
Smith? No, I'm just kidding.
No. And it made it very difficult to Google because I was like, if you Google 17th century John Smith, you get the Pocahontas guy. Yeah. And so then you have to go to the Wikipedia disambiguation on John Smith's, which is a mile long, and try to find the one that wrote this compilation of sermons.
We should just start calling him Jejune Smith because of this relation.
Jejune Smith. He had a bunch of his sermons compiled in the book Select Discourses, and in one of them, Smith discusses why people search for God, and he says, quote, "Our souls cannot live upon that thin and spare diet, those jejune and insipid morsels which this outward world furnisheth their table with."
I mean, that's pretty good. If we're talking about allegories here, it's a good allegory. Yeah.
He's like, God will feed you in a way that life does not.
That is a metaphor that I can munch on, you know?
Heck yeah. Nothing jejune about that metaphor. So in a minute, we're going to get to the main definitions that I gave at the top of the episode. But before that, I want to take a quick detour to the doctor's office.
Oh.
Kyle.
That sounds like a trap. It's like you don't ever want to go. We're just gonna. It's like I'm going to the vet and I'm gonna have a cone around my head at the end of this.
Well, Kyle, you half remembered it at the beginning of the episode. Arne Christensen did, in fact, bring up the word jejune, which I remembered so late in the game. Do you have any recollection of in what context he brought this up?
It had to do with some body part, and now I'm trying to remember. Oh, is it the duodenum?
Kyle, you got as physically and etymologically close as you could have gotten. It is the bit directly next to the duodenum.
Wow, I should have an MD.
So the jejunum, also known as the jejune gut, is part of the small intestine. There's like 3 parts in a row. One is the duodenum, and then the jejunum, and then the ileum.
That's like if the human body had a Nina, Pinta, and a Santa Maria. That's what they are, right?
That's them, but they process what you eat. So the jejunum is where a lot of absorption of nutrients happens before the remaining materials move on. As such, this part of the intestines was often found empty when dead bodies were autopsied. So they named it the jejunum because it was empty and barren.
It's like, sure. Like, probably they were just like, what are like practical words to call this thing of the empty thing? But then man, they could have called it so many other things, you know?
Honestly, I think jejunum is better than duodenum because that is from the Latin for 12, because it's 12 finger lengths wide, which is, to me, worse. I don't want to think about my guts in terms of how many fingers wide.
Are you kidding me? 12 finger lengths? Everybody's got 12 fingers. So everybody knows how wide a duodenum is.
So this definition, jejunum, actually predates jejune's use in the English language. Early physicians pulled the Latin word, going back to as early as the 14th century. There are references to the jejunum. Or jejunium, also sometimes called the jejune gut, as in the 1696 revision of Edward Phillips' dictionary, The New World of English Words, which defines the jejune gut as, quote, "the second of the small guts, so called because it is frequently empty." Guts, capital G.
It just feels like it doesn't belong, you know?
No.
Just like, gut feels like a word invented by, newsies. And not by
and shouldn't
the
be
17th
in a
century.
1696 dictionary. Now at last, Kyle, let's get to those uses of jejune which are not quite so literal. In fact, just as far back as it was used to mean lacking in substance physically, jejune has also been used to mean lacking substance metaphorically. Per the Oxford English Dictionary, quote, "unsatisfying to the mind, dull, flat, dry, or uninteresting."
all things that I've been called before in my life in the same breath, actually. It was that exact phrase.
As a slew.
Yeah. It was a press briefing and just people were yelling it out at me.
Yeah, just shouted across the room. Like all from different people.
Yeah.
This sense shows up much earlier per the 1656 revision of John Bullocar's dictionary and English Expositor, second English dictionary ever written.
Oh, wow.
Although this was a later edition.
Sure.
He defines jejune as, quote, hungry, empty, weak, frothy, etc., as when we say of an oration, sermon, or any discourse that it is jejune, we mean sorry, paltry, and very ordinary stuff.
Stuff!
Yeah, it's very, I found it to be very ordinary stuff. Kyle, you made a face halfway through me reading that.
Yeah, I did, because you said frothy.
I said frothy?
Yeah, frothy.
Side note, as early as the 1500s, the word frothy has been used similar to jejune to mean empty or insubstantial, because that's what froth is.
Yeah.
It's just air.
I mean, that makes sense, but it sounds like something from a New York Times review and not from something that long ago.
Yeah.
Frothy.
Frothy.
Wow. Whatever they had in their water at that time for these, metaphorical uses of words was really helping out.
Well, the thing is that the people who lived in the cities rarely had water. They were sort of drinking alcohol more often than water because the water wasn't clean.
It was frothy water.
It was frothy water. It was bad. This sense of jejune actually goes back to Bullocar's original 1616 English Expositor, except the original definition reads, instead of very ordinary stuff, it reads, sorry, paltry, and very dangerous stuff.
What?
That goes back to the Middle English definition of dangerous, which was, among other things, quote, difficult to deal with or hard to please.
Oh, interesting. Emily, you promised at the beginning of this episode that this wouldn't be a dangerous episode, and you are now reneging on your promise.
I'm so sorry, I lied.
Right? It was a frothy promise.
My jejune words.
Yeah.
So I've given a lot of dictionary definitions, but in terms of in-context uses, there are lots of historical quotes I could pull here, but now we're getting into the definitions that are still used, and in fact, not uncommon. So instead, I can give you a quote from 2014 in a New York Times dance review by Alistair Macaulay titled, A Place Where Kitsch Gets All Dressed Up in Avant-Garde Clothing. Which I think is too many words for an article title, but a lot of the articles I looked at were worried.
Yeah, way too many words. But it paints an image,
Yeah, absolutely. The article is a review of a particular theater festival, but Macaulay opens by talking about how avant-garde theater can be prone to, quote, a high quotient of ego pornography and fatuity, which means stupidness.
Yeah.
And says, quote, overall, the fringe scene can prove tiresomely jejune.
Wow. That's good. It's good stuff. He's not wrong about that too,
You're a theater guy. You can back that up.
Yeah. Sometimes people just be doing stuff and your gut tells you it's bad stuff. It's frothy stuff.
Your capital G gut.
Your capital G gut, your jejune gut says, stop watching. I'm going to start saying I've got a jejune gut feeling about this and see if that affects how people
But don't ask me for any more detail than that. But the meaning that jejune often carries today, or instead of or maybe alongside dull, is the one that you initially had a sense of, which is immature, childish, or naive. There are loads of modern examples in this sense. I have one here from a 2023 opinion piece in the Washington Post by David Von Draley, titled, We'll Never Solve Our Many Crises Without This One Ingredient.
Oh, is it peanut butter? Is it peanut butter? Please tell me it's peanut butter.
I guess these titles are just always really wordy.
Yeah.
Draley talks about how nowadays people are sort of suffocating under the weight of all these global concerns. Mm-hmm. And he writes, quote, the news calls us to think constantly on a very large scale about problems to which no individual holds the key, and to feel jejune if we slip from that lofty, arid plane to delight in something here and now.
Oh, it's a very good use of the word.
It's a really good use of that word.
Quite opposite the definition of a jejune use of that word.
No, not jejune in the slightest.
Yeah. Did jejune come to mean naive from like the idea of like it coming from someone who is empty of wisdom?
So possibly. We're not 100% sure where this angle of jejune came from, but the OED speculates, quote, this use may owe its origin to the mistaken belief that the word is connected with the Latin juvenis, young,
yes,
or French jeune, young, as in juvenile.
Oh, see, I thought I've seen jejune spelled Jejeune, which makes a lot of sense. But I may also be... Is that a way that it's spelled?
I don't know if that... Spell it again?
Jejeune.
Oh, that might be part of the conflation with the French jeune, which is Jeune.
Yeah, but now that I'm Googling it, I don't see any examples of that. So
that might have just been an association in your mind. But it's an association
French?
In a lot of other people's minds.
Crazy.
Kyle, I know we normally do this towards the beginning of the episode rather than towards the end, but can you think of any other words that English gets from the Latin juvenis or juvenis?
Oh, from juvenis.
Yeah.
Or juvenile.
Or juvenis. It's spelled with a J.
Yeah. Juvenile.
Yeah, for sure. What if you named your son Kyle? He would be Kyle.
Oh, Junior. Sure.
Junior.
Yeah.
Yep. What if you went to the spa and got like a mud mask to make your skin all nice and radiant? You'd be
rejuvenated.
Yep.
That's wow, because you become a child again.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. The month of June.
Yeah.
June we get from Juno. That one possibly related.
June is possibly related to juvenile.
Juvenile. Yeah.
Oh, what is June like? Where does Juno come from?
So we get from the Middle English Juno. That possibly comes from a Latin phrase that means like she of the heavenly sky.
Oh, okay.
But it also possibly comes from a Latin phrase that means the young goddess. So the young.
Oh, okay, sure. The only thing I remember about Juno is that she's always got 2 peacocks with her. That's all I can remember.
That's all most of us know.
Yeah. And if you ever watch the film about the pregnant teenager, yes, she does always have 2 peacocks with her. They incorporated that into the film, so it's
in the film. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This juvenile definition of jejune came later. It emerged around the late 19th century. And consequently, even into the 20th century, not every dictionary reflected this new meaning. In a 1982 article in the New York Times language section, crossword writer Will Wang complains about people who write in with corrections about the crossword. And he writes, quote, other people still have old dictionaries and write in to correct you if you define the word intrigue as fascinate or the word jejune as childish.
So funny.
Yeah, because it was a newish meaning.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good example of how quickly language changes and how you just kind of got to adapt. And like, it's not always about,
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that. It's just like, well, I mean, that's how I'm using it.
So
it does. Sorry, bud.
Yeah. So most of the modern quotes I found seem to use jejune in a way that sort of encompasses both empty and dull and naive and immature.
Sure.
It's just sort of a general put down.
Yeah.
But it still occasionally shows up meaning literally without substance or malnourished or hungry sometimes. And here at the end of this episode, Kyle, I am hungry for you to pick any one of those definitions and use jejune in a sentence.
This is really good, Emily. It's really good. We don't often talk about adjectives. We're a very noun centric etymology podcast, just by virtue of that being the majority of words out there. So, jejune is going to be a real special treat for me.
Is that your sentence?
No, no. My sentence is going to be. Every time I get to the end of one of these episodes, I am worried that while I'm trying to make a really important statement out of using the word, I'm worried that instead it ultimately ends up being a jejune sentence.
Yeah. And occasionally it is, but not this time, Kyle. That was the perfect sentence.
Thank you, Emily.
Shall we celebrate with a game?
Let's celebrate.
Kyle, the game I have is called Jejune Delinquency. Listen, the word jejune is out here parading around with the definition juvenile purely because of a mistaken association with its etymological roots. And it is not the only word that is lying to you. So for this game, I'm going to tell you about 3 of these delinquent words, and I want you to guess their real meaning.
Okay.
We're going to rat them out.
Yeah. Listen, I was a tattletale at some point in my life, so.
All right. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Bemuse, B-E-M-U-S-E, is a word which doesn't see a ton of use, certainly less than its etymological cousin, amuse, with which it is often conflated. But in its original sense, bemuse does not mean to entertain. What should bemuse mean?
Oh, now I'm trying to hear bemuse in a sentence, and I'm like, no, that should be amuse. That should be amused.
Yeah. Well, that's
that
the bulk of use that bemuse gets. That's what bemuse means now by convention, but it's not what it originally meant.
But it is related to amuse.
Yeah. I don't know if this is figure outable. I would advise you probably to guess.
Right.
But, I mean, maybe guess based on the root muse.
Does bemused mean... Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. So, like, bemused, like, means muse, like, but the muse is removed, or removed from muse. So my guess
that
is,
would
like...
be demused.
Well, no, because like we've talked about bereaved before, and how reave means like child, and bereaved means having the child taken away from you. Is that what that meant?
Reeve is connected with rover. It means taken. So if you have been bereaved, you have been something has been taken from you.
I'm going to look that up, but my guess is that bemused means bored.
No. So to bemuse someone is to make them utterly confused or stupefied.
Oh.
The root muse means to be absorbed in thought, and the prefix be, in this case, means thoroughly or to excess.
Interesting.
So excessively absorbed to the point where you're catatonic.
That's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
All right, next one. So noisome, Noisome, is a little bit muddier. It is sometimes assumed to be related to the word noise, and in fact sometimes is spelled noisome to match that etymology. That is incorrect. If you guess that noisome is related to the word annoy, and indeed if you use the word to mean annoying, you'd be correct in doing so, but noisome has an older meaning, which is often forgotten. What should noisome mean?
I knew this at one point in my life. Noisome. Some means like full of in this context. Yep. The noisome. Is it anger? Is it angry? Ornery?
No.
I have another guess. Can I take a second guess?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know why, but I want to say it means smelly.
Yeah,
stinky.
Basically,
yeah.
that is on the right track. So the original meaning is harmful or noxious.
Noxious
comes from the Old French "ennuis," or other French words. It was muddy, meaning to harm, and that was originally the meaning of annoy as well.
Wow. Oh, that makes sense because annoy, I feel like, is used a lot in like diatribes in olden times, and you're like, well, that seems like a really minor word to use.
Yeah, I think it's sort of ameliorated over time, but originally it was like you are causing real damage.
Sure, yeah.
Last one up. This is the most fun one. Factoid, Factoid, was either first coined or first explained by journalist Norman Mailer in 1973. Within a decade of that, usage of factoid morphed to refer to a trivial bit of information from the mistaken assumption that the suffix oid was a diminutive. But what should factoid mean?
Yes, okay. So I know this because I looked into it because we did a dictionary post a long time ago about the word febrifacient, which you brought up in the episode on apricity. Febrifacient means causing a fever, and the facient ending it means to make, like, there's a lot of, like, fact means something that is made originally, you know?
Okay.
And so factoid the oid ending isn't diminutive. I think it's depreciative. I think a factoid is a false piece of information, right?
Basically, yeah. It means a piece of information accepted or presented as fact, but not necessarily true. And it employs the Greek suffix oid, which basically means resembling. Like, it looks like a fact, but it ain't.
What does that make the noid, then, of Domino's Pizza fame? Yeah.
Something less... something resembling life, but that shouldn't exist.
Something resembling a pizza mascot, but it's not really.
Yeah.
Emily, it's such a great episode. I've learned so much. Jejune is a really, really, really good word.
Useful.
It's useful, and it's a really easy way to sound fancy and knowledgeable in everyday life. And so we're all going to sprinkle a little jejune maybe right after breakfast.
A gentacular jejune.
A gentacular jejune. It's the upcoming canceled Series of Unfortunate Events sequel, the gentacular jejune.
Yeah.
Emily, loved the episode. Everybody at home, remember that if you loved it, you can watch more of us on YouTube at Butter No Parsnips, and you can find Butter No Parsnips on other social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Butter No Parsnips Podcast, and on TikTok at Butter No Parsnips. And if you like today's episode, consider giving us a 5-star rating or review wherever you heard us.
And if you really like today's episode, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/butternoparsnips. Donating $5 or more gets you exclusive access to Buttered Parsnips, our after-hours podcast.
Thanks so much to all of you. You help us make what we make.
And with that, I've been Emily Moyers.
And I've been Kyle Imperatore, and this has been Butter No Parsnips.
Butter No Parsnips is produced by Seth Glicksman, Kyle Imperatore, and myself, Emily Moyers. The main and accompanying themes were composed by Kyle Imperatore.